Hi boys and girls, it's Miss Rossi. Today we are going to create a beach scene. Let's get started. What you will be needing today is a piece of paper, a pencil, an eraser, something to trace your drawing with. I'm going to use a Sharpie, but you can use a marker, a colored pencil, or a dark colored crayon. You can even use a pen. I'm going to color my picture in today using crayons, but you can use any supply you have at home to color your picture in. I would recommend using something like crayons or colored pencils. Since we are going to shade our picture today to add some different values, I think it's easier to layer things like crayons and colored pencils than it is to layer something like marker. Today we're going to draw a picture of the beach. We're going to include a bucket, I'm going to draw a crab, and we're also going to add a sand castle. We're going to use things like value and shading to create form, to make our objects look more like 3D instead of 2D. We're also going to use our foreground, our middle ground, and our background to create space on our paper. And we're going to be doing this using size. So our size of our objects is going to be different in the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. The foreground of your paper is typically the bottom section of your paper. It is going to be what is closest to you when looking at the picture and thinking about the space. So whatever is closest to you is going to be larger than something that's in the background, which is going to be closer to the top of our paper, and the objects there are going to be smaller. We can see this in our everyday life because when something is farther away from us, it looks a lot smaller than something that is up close. An easy way to see this right now is you can hold out your hand, and the closer you put your hand to your face, the bigger it's going to get. The further away you take your hand from your face, the smaller and smaller it is going to get. So we just need to remember objects closer to us are going to be larger, objects further away from us are going to appear smaller. And we're going to see that through the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. So the section of our drawing that is closest to us, the foreground, the area of our drawing that's more in the middle, which is our middle ground, and then what is all the way furthest away from us, going to be the smallest, that is our background. So we're going to draw a nice little beach scene. I'm going to start by drawing the foreground. Since these objects are going to be bigger, they might overlap things that are in the other sections of my landscape here. So I would want to make sure I draw these first, so I don't have to erase as much as if I drew them on top of things later on. I'm going to create a bucket in my foreground. My bucket's going to be full of sand, and it's going to have a shovel sticking out of it. To start, I'm going to draw the opening of our bucket, so that top round part of our bucket. I'm going to put the opening of my bucket right around here. It's going to kind of go off the edge of my paper a little bit. That is okay, but I want it close to the bottom, and I want it to be nice and big. After I get a circle shape that I like, I'm going to draw a straight line from the edge of my bucket just down towards the bottom of my paper. Now that I have the base of where my bucket is going to go, I can start to reshape what I have here to make it look a little more realistic. So I'm going to curve my bucket top up a little bit more. I want it to be more of an oval shape than a circle. Just because of the angle that we are looking at it, it might be looking a little more sideways. It's not going to be a perfectly round circle. I can also add the top edge of my bucket, because if I'm looking at my bucket from this angle, I would see that top edge of it. I can also add the handle on my bucket. So coming out here from the edge, we're going to have a nice another round, almost like a smile shape. And I'm going to do that 2 times, just like we did the top rim of our bucket, because that is going to be our handle. There we go. Now I can start to add what's inside my bucket. So my bucket is going to be full of sand. It is at the beach. So I'm going to do a little wavy, bumpy line. And that's where my shovel is going to be sticking out of my bucket. So I'm just going to do 2 straight lines going up, both of those lines in, and then I'm going to bring the handle of the shovel straight up. Our handle is going to come out like a little square up at the top, and that's just going off the edge of my page there. My shovel is not see-through, so I can erase this line here, and I could add another more rectangular line on the inside of my shovel to show the depth a little bit better. You can add some more wavy lines inside your bucket for more lumps and bumps of sand. If you want to add like a seashell in there or something, you can do that also. I'll make a seashell by just doing a round shape that's kind of pointy towards the bottom. It's going to come out and do a little wiggly line across the bottom. Going to add some lines. If you want one that's just kind of sticking up out of the sand, you can just draw the top half and draw a line to show your sand just like we did with our shovel, and then just have those lines sticking out for your seashell. I'm going to leave my bucket the way that it is right now. We're going to add shadows and things later on when we color it. Our bucket and our shovel is nice and big for our foreground. Now we're going to add our middle ground and our background. So I'm going to do a little bumpy wavy line to be my sand coming across here, and in this section I'm going to create a middle ground, so my items are going to be kind of medium-ish in size. And then all the way back here I'm going to do another bumpy and lumpy line, and that will be my background section. I'm going to draw a little crab in this section for my middle ground. I'm going to draw it so it's smaller than my bucket, but still fairly large, because we wanted to show that it is further back in space, but not all the way towards the background. To make my crab, I am going to do a round line coming across, and I'm making almost like a football shape that's just going to come down more across the bottom. From here you can add some claws coming out, so I'm just doing 2 curved lines reaching up. This one's going to get cut off on the edge of my paper, but that's okay. I'm going to add a little round end on my claw, and then I'm going to curve up. Going to curve in and out, kind of making like a check mark, and then curve it nice and big all the way around to make that claw. Since I can't fit mine on that side, I'm just going to leave it the way that it is, and I'm going to come up towards the top, and I'm going to make 2 more curved sections. So these are going to be where my crab's eyes are. It's that same shape that we used for our arms, but we're going to top it off with a nice big round eyeball. And you can add a pupil in there and color that in, leaving a little white space for our highlight. I'm adding 2 little dashed lines as nose holes, and I'm going to give him a big smile. And I can add my crab's legs by doing those same shapes that I did for the arms. And for the eyes, I'm going to give him 3 legs on each side. And I'm just going to do like a little triangle as my crab's foot. So now we have our nice big bucket in our foreground, we have our medium-sized crab in our middle ground, and now I'm going to move on to the background. And all the way in the background, I'm going to have a nice big sand castle. So I want an extra big sand castle, but since it's going to be further in the background, it's going to come out kind of small, and that's okay. I'm going to draw a wavy line in my sand here, and that's going to be where my sand castle is touching the ground. I'm going to do 2 straight lines going up, and this is going to be the middle part of my sandcastle. I'm just erasing that line I can see through it, because we do not want this to be see-through. After that, I'm going to do a curved line to connect them. I'm going to bring that line out just a little bit on both sides. I'm going to do 2 straight lines going up, and then I'm going to do a castle line going across. Castle line goes over, up, across, down, over, up, across, down, all the way. Now you can make these kind of rectangle shapes bigger or smaller, so if you only want like 3 going across, if you want them extra small and you want more going across, you can do that. That is totally fine. I'm going to add a little window, and then I'm going to add a big arch down here as like the doorway for my castle. Now my castle is going to have more parts coming out of it. It's going to be nice and big. You can design your castle however you'd like, but I'm just going to do another straight line going up, and I'm going to have that straight line coming out of one of my castle points. I'm going to do the same thing to make my castle here. So I'm doing a curved line, and then I'm just making that same line that goes across. I'm going to add one up there, and I think I'm going to add 2 little windows down the side there. I'm going to do the same thing on this side of my castle, and then from the back here, I'm going to have my final castle section. It's going to come out from both of my side sections here, and then it's going to go across, and instead of doing that same castle top that I've already done, I think I'm going to make this one more of like a tower type cone shape, and then I could add 1 big window in there. I'm going to add some flags on the tops of each of my castle sections, and I'm just doing a straight line up and then making a triangle that has wavy lines as the sides. Making those wavy lines is going to make it look like it's blowing in the breeze. So I have my castle in the background, and I can continue that background by adding a couple pointy wavy lines to create like an ocean where our beach is ending and our ocean water is beginning. And then I can add a sun in the corner with some little clouds. And now going back to the idea of our foreground, our middle ground, and our background, my castle is roughly the same size as my bucket and my shovel that I drew up here. And that is because in real life, if these objects were next to each other, my castle would be much bigger than my shovel and my bucket. So when I'm seeing them in this situation, where the bucket is a lot closer to me, it's going to look almost as big as that large sandcastle that we made. I'm going to grab my Sharpie and I'm going to trace over all of my pencil lines. As I'm tracing over my pencil lines, I'm also going to add a few dots in the sand to create some texture. So in the sand in my bucket, in the sand on the ground, and in the sand in my castle, I'm just going to add a few dots in areas where I think there might be a shadow to help that for when I add color later on. Like I said, if you don't have a Sharpie, you can use whatever you have at home to trace your picture. And that is my beach scene all traced out. So I traced over all of my pencil lines with my Sharpie, and then I went in and I added some little dots in my sand to help create my shadows and to add some texture. We're going to create value while we're coloring today, so that means we're going to add some shadows and we're going to add some highlights. You can do this easily with things like crayon and colored pencil because you can layer these colors really well to build up darker values and then to build up lighter values. So the first thing I'm going to start with is my bucket area here. I think I'm going to do a nice blue bucket, and I'm going to pick out some different color blues that I can use. But I just want different shades of blue, so I have some dark versions and I have some lighter versions. If you don't have all these different colored crayons or colored pencils or whatever you're using, you can always use just a little bit of black to help add your shadows and layer that too. So now looking at my bucket, I am just going to lightly shade in my entire bucket with my medium toned blue as my base. The whole key of creating shadows and values when using things like crayons and colored pencils is working in multiple light layers. So I'm barely pressing with my crayon as I'm coloring in this space. I can fill in my bucket handle also. Yours does not have to be blue. You can pick whatever colors you would like. And I'm going to do that top rim of my bucket also. I am not going to do the inside of my bucket yet. Now I'm going to take my darker blue, so this is my indigo, and I'm going to start in this corner and I'm just going to lightly, again, coloring super light, barely pressing with my crayon on the paper, color right on top of what I already colored, and I'm going to keep it darkest on this side and lightest as I go across to create a nice value range to make my bucket look round. So I can go back in this corner and darken it up if I want, and then just make it nice and light coming out. So I'm lifting up as I'm pushing on my crayon, so then it is barely touching our paper, so it can slowly blend into that regular blue. Since our bucket is round, it is actually going to be shaded on both sides, so I can even come in a tiny bit on this side towards the center, but I want to make sure I leave a nice space where it's super light to help my bucket look 3D. I'm going to do that exact same thing underneath my handle down here, and now I can go into some of the other colors. So I picked out a cerulean that is a much lighter, much brighter blue, and I can go right on top of everything. It's just going to brighten up my blue color here. And since I am doing these light layers of crayon, I can add multiple different colors on top of each other, and they will all blend together nicely. And since this is lighter than the first blue that I started, I don't really need to lift up as much as I'm coloring because it will keep that light space left in the center. And if you want it even darker in the sides, you can always go in with a tiny bit of black where you're barely pushing your crayon in that corner to deepen that shadow. Now that the base of my bucket is finished, and it looks nice and round, I'm going to color in the handle the same way that I just did the base of my bucket. So going back to my indigo colored crayon, I'm keeping those edges or corners of my bucket handle nice and dark, and then fading that out as it comes towards the center. And lastly, I'm going to do the exact same thing on the top edge of my bucket. I'm going to keep this a little bit darker most of the way around, except for that one space where I have my highlight, where I have those lighter tones. And now that I have the whole outside of my bucket finished, I'm going to take my lightest color that I used, and I'm going to color in this inside edge around my shovel, nice and lightly with my light color. Now that my bucket is finished, I can do the shovel. I think I'm going to do an orange shovel today, so I'm going to pick a nice dark orange. Now my shovel is going to be mostly regular orange. I don't think I'm going to add that many shadows to it since it's not as round as our bucket. I'm just going to go in first with my regular colored orange and fill that whole space in just like we did with our bucket. And then I'm just going to go around and pick one side of my shovel where I want more of a shadow, and I'm going to add my darker orange to that side, closest to my outline from my Sharpie. Going to be this inside piece where I drew that extra rectangle shape, because this is the part that's showing like the depth of our shovel, that inside portion that actually allows our shovel to scoop. So I'm just going to color in most of that area with my darker orange. And then I'm going to take my lightest orange, which is a yellow orange, and I'm just going to color along the top of all of this to brighten it up, blend those colors together a little bit more. The next thing I'm going to do is color in my crab. I'm going to keep that red orange, and then I'm just going to grab my red crayon, and I am going to grab like a dark pink colored crayon. My crab is going to be mostly red, but I'm just going to make the crab arms a little bit lighter with my pink. So I'm going to actually start by doing the arms and the legs and these eyeball sections with that light pink, and I will darken those with my red. Now I'm going to do the claws very lightly with red, and the body very lightly with red. And then I will add some shading along the sides using my red orange crayon and my pink. And the next thing I am going to do is my sand. For my sand, I'm going to use a couple different colors. I'm going to use kind of like a peachy color. I'm also going to use some lighter browns that are a little more yellow or orangey. And I'm also going to use a little bit of like a dandelion yellow to add some highlights. So I'm going to practice this in my bucket. So I'm going to do the sand in my bucket, coloring it all lightly with my beige colored crayon. And then in areas where I want shadows, in areas where I put those little dots to already indicate a shadow, I'm going to go back over those sections with my darker browns and things to make that color a little bit darker and to add some depth to our sand. So I am just going to color around those areas nice and lightly with my darker brown colored crayons, focusing on areas where things might be casting shadows in the sand or where things are interacting with the sand. So where my shovel meets my sand, I'm making it nice and dark. Where the seashell is sticking out of the sand, I'm making it nice and dark. And all these little edge lines. I'm going to do that same thing in the rest of my sand and in my sand castle. So in all these spaces where there are dots, where I am creating a darker shadow, I'm going in with my darker brown colors along with my peach to create some darker sections to add depth. So while I'm looking at my sand castle, I'm going to start by coloring that entire thing with my peach color, nice and lightly as a base, and then I'm going to go in with my darker browns, just like I did in my bucket, around the edges to make my sandcastle look round. So I'm pressing firmly as I'm close to the edges and pressing lighter as I go towards the center just like I did with my bucket, and I'm just building on those tones with my other brown shades. Usually when things are round, you're going to get shadows on both sides and it's going to be lightest towards the center. So that's what I'm going to do on all my castle sections. And then I'm just going to color in the doorways and insides of my castles with only my browns and not my beige sand color, just to make it a little bit darker. And I might even grab a darker brown to add some more of a shadow in there. And I'm just going to keep that darkness coming from one side, so it's darkest on one side and lightest on the other. And I'm just going to do that inside all of my windows. With my sand all finished, I'm going to color in my ocean and my sky. I picked a couple different blue shades to mix together in my water. I'm just going to fill in these wavy sections here, mixing together all these different colors, but I'm going to leave that extra area that I outlined white as the white caps of our waves, where it's all white and foamy. And that is my beach landscape all finished. So I have my bucket and my shovel in the foreground, so they are nice and large compared to the sandcastle in my background, and the ocean waves and the sun that I drew. I have my crab hanging out in the middle ground, and I used my crayons and different colors, blending those together today to create different values, to add shadows and highlights, to create depth and space in my picture. When you're finished, don't forget to share a picture of your finished project with me. I can't wait to see the amazing work you guys are creating. Try your best, have fun, and get creative. Bye!